40 years ago, in the humid, noisy backroom of a Denny's diner. The air hung heavy with the smell of grease and the clatter of dirty plates. Jesus stood by the steaming dishwasher, watching this young man, his eyes sharp and focused, scrubbing away the grime of the day. Jensen wasn't just cleaning dishes. He was learning the law of the grind. He wasn't looking at the soap suds. He was thinking about the speed of light and the movement of pixels. Back then, computing was a slow, linear march, one step at a time, one row at a time. Computers were boring boxes for accounting and text. But Jensen? He was like a young alchemist looking for the parallel secret. He wondered, why must a machine think like a clock when the universe moves like a symphony, with everything happening all at once? He looked at the chaotic splashing of the water and saw the math of the future. He planted a seed that the industry called niche. The belief that the world needed graphics, not just numbers. The experts laughed. Video games are just for kids. Why build a giant chip for toys? But Jesus smiled, because he knew the hidden architecture of the world. The most complex realities are built from a billion tiny simultaneous brushstrokes. For this vision, Jensen entered his own kitchen of fire. He didn't seek a safe corporate ladder. He co-founded NVIDIA at a Denny's booth, over cheap coffee and high dreams. He put his reputation on a GPU, a term no one understood. He spent his nights coding the geometry of light, trying to prove that the eye is the gateway to the soul. He knew one thing: to see the future, you must first build the glass that can reflect it. In that small, struggling office, amidst the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of early prototypes, the gears of a visual revolution started to click. It was humble. It was messy. But Jensen was pouring his sweat into the parallel processor. He was proving that a grain of wheat, if it is willing to wash the world's feet first, can one day power the world's mind. The kitchen was hot and loud, but in that steam, the blueprint for the AI era was already being forged. 30 years ago, inside a cramped office where the air was thick with the scent of ozone and desperation, the shadows of bankruptcy stretched long across the floor. Jesus stood by the silent financial ledgers, watching Jensen pace the room, a leather-clad warrior with his back against the wall. The first chips had failed. The market was a graveyard of broken dreams. He wasn't looking at the exit signs. He was looking at a single, terrifying chance to survive. Back then, NVIDIA was a ghost in the making, a name about to be forgotten. They had money for only one more attempt, one final roll of the dice. The world said, play it safe. Build something small. Crawl before you walk. But Jensen, he was like a captain setting fire to his own ships so his men could only go forward. He chose to skip a whole generation of technology, betting the entire company on a chip that didn't even exist yet, the Riva 128. He planted a seed that the valley called suicide. But the divine called it the audacity of faith. The competitors were giants, armored in gold and history. NVIDIA was just a boy with a slingshot. But Jesus smiled, because he knew the law of the crucible. The purest gold is only found when the fire is at its hottest. For this gamble, Jensen lived on the edge of the abyss. He didn't care about the safety of a plan B. He worked as if the Reaper was standing in the hallway, pushing his engineers to do the work of a year in a single month. He knew that if they missed by a millimeter, the dream would shatter forever. He spent his nights staring at the logic gates, knowing that in the world of silicon, there is no mercy for the slow. He knew one thing: to save your life you must be willing to lose it for the sake of the vision. In the frantic silence of that final manufacturing run, the gears of an impossible comeback started to click. It was a miracle of timing. It was a masterpiece of grit. Against all odds, the chip didn't just work, it screamed. Jensen had turned a death sentence into a throne. The bank account was nearly zero, but in that emptiness, the foundation of $1 trillion empire was finally poured. 20 years ago, inside the humming research labs where the air was cold enough to preserve secrets, the glow of 1,000 monitors painted the walls in an electric green. Jesus stood behind the rows of silent workstations, watching Jensen insist on a dream that made the accountants tremble. He wasn't looking for a faster game of Doom. He was looking for a universal language. He wanted to take the power of the GPU and give it to the scientists, the healers, and the dreamers. Back then, a graphics chip was a specialist. It knew only how to paint pictures. The world said, "Don't fix what isn't broken. Keep selling to the gamers." But Jensen? He was like a man building a cathedral in a town that hadn't found its faith yet. He poured billions into CUDA, a bridge between the math of the screen and the math of the universe. For years it was a ghost project, expensive, lonely, and misunderstood. He planted a seed that the stock market called a money pit, but the divine called it the foundation of the mind. Investors demanded he stop. They called him a fool for distracting the company. But Jesus smiled, because he knew the beauty of the long game. To harvest the forest of tomorrow, you must be willing to water the dirt for a decade without a single leaf in sight. For this obsession, Jensen became a man of one word. He didn't care about the quarterly reports or the whispers of his rivals. He traveled the world, giving his tools away for free to universities and researchers. He was building a hidden army of creators who spoke his language. He spent his nights looking at simulations of proteins and galaxies, knowing that one day the world's problems would be too big for a single brain, but just right for 1,000,000 parallel souls. He knew one thing: true power is not found in what you sell, but in what you enable. In the quiet, patient years of the CUDA winter, the gears of the deep learning revolution started to click in the dark. It was a slow, invisible alignment, but Jensen was ready. He had built the library before the books were even written. He was proving that a grain of wheat, if it is willing to wait in the cold earth for 10 winters, can feed an entire civilization of AI. The stock price was flat and the critics were loud, but in that silence, the tongue of the future was finally being mastered. 12 years ago, in the dim, neon-lit corridors of a high-tech university lab, the air crackled with the static of a breakthrough that was about to scream. Jesus stood at the corner of a cluttered desk, watching as a group of young researchers plugged Jensen's graphics cards into a machine built for war, but used for thought. They weren't rendering dragons or soldiers. They were feeding a neural network with millions of images. Jensen didn't know their names yet, but he had built the only engine in the world powerful enough to ignite their fire. Back then, artificial intelligence was a winter that seemed like it would never end. The giants of Silicon Valley had given up, calling it a dead end. But Jensen? He was like a blacksmith who had forged a legendary sword, waiting for the hand strong enough to wield it. When the AlexNet results hit the world, the GPU didn't just calculate, it visioned. It saw the world. It recognized the patterns. It woke up. He planted a seed that the world called serendipity, but the divine called it the alignment of destiny. Suddenly, every AI scientist on the planet realized that Jensen's gaming toy was actually the supercomputer they had been praying for. But Jesus smiled, because he knew the secret of the long wait. Preparation is the silent prayer that God answers with opportunity. For this explosion, Jensen didn't just sit back and count the gold. He doubled down with a ferocity that bordered on madness. He pivoted the entire multi-billion-dollar company in a single day. "We are an AI company now," he declared, changing every line of code, every design, every heart within NVIDIA. He walked through the fires of the transition, spending his nights reimagining the very nature of computing. He knew one thing: when the wind of the Holy Spirit blows, you don't build a wall, you build a sail. In the thunderous roar of the first DGX-1, the first AI in a box, the gears of the third industrial revolution started to click. Jensen personally delivered the first one to a small startup called OpenAI. It was a gift of fire. It was a covenant of power. He was proving that a grain of wheat, if it is ready when the rain finally falls, can turn a desert into an ocean of intelligence. The world saw a sudden stock spike, but in that collision of miracles, the biological and the digital had finally learned to dance. Today, inside the gleaming triangular halls of the NVIDIA Voyager headquarters, the air is cool, but the pulse of the man at the center is burning. Jesus stands by the glass balcony, watching Jensen pull on that same black leather jacket, a uniform not of fashion but of war. The world sees a billionaire with $1 trillion crown. Jesus sees a man who still acts as if he has only 30 days of life left in his company. He isn't resting on his laurels. He is telling his thousands of disciples, run, don't walk. Either you are running for food, or you are running from being food. Back then, leaders wanted to be comfortable, to be stable, to be safe. They thought success was a destination where you could finally sit down. But Jensen? He is like a monk who treats every morning as a new battle. He flattened the hierarchy, tore down the walls of the executive office, choosing to eat in the cafeteria with the engineers, smelling the same sweat and the same dreams. He realized that a company is not a building, it is a shared will. He planted a seed that the business world called paranoia, but the divine called it vigilance. The crowds ask, why the jacket? Why the intensity? Why never slow down? But Jesus smiles, because he knew the nature of the Spirit. To stay alive is to stay hungry, to stay humble is to stay connected to the earth. For this relentless pace, Jensen became the chief architect of urgency. He doesn't look at the stock price, he looks at the speed of light. He challenges his people to do things that the laws of physics say are impossible, spending his nights obsessing over the throughput of human thought. He walks through his empire not as a king, but as a servant who refuses to let the fire go out. He knows one thing: humility is the realization that your greatest success is just a platform for your next struggle. In the synchronized rhythm of a global workforce moving as one, the gears of hyperscale innovation started to click. It was intense. It was exhausting. It was beautiful. Jensen was proving that a grain of wheat, if it refuses to stop growing even after the harvest, can become a forest that covers the world. The jacket is worn and the hair is turning gray, but under that leather, the heart of the scullery boy is still beating with the fire of the first day. Recently, inside the silent expanse of a digital universe that exists between the electrons, the air is replaced by the perfect frictionless logic of the omniverse. Jesus stands within the shimmering coordinates of a virtual world, watching Jensen build a mirror of the entire Earth, a digital twin that breathes and moves. He isn't just creating a simulation. He is building a playground for the Holy Spirit of discovery. He wants to predict the path of a hurricane and the heartbeat of a factory, before they even happen in the physical realm. Back then, we thought the virtual was a fake world, a place to escape. We thought the real was the only place where truth could reside. But Jensen, he is like a master clockmaker building a model of the heavens. He realized that to save the physical world, we must first master the digital one. He connects the robot's mind with the sensor's eye in a world made of math, testing 1 billion possibilities in a second so that we don't fail in the sun. He planted a seed that the world called the metaverse, but the divine called it the blueprint of stewardship. The skeptics scoffed. It's just a high-end video game. Why spend billions on a ghost world? But Jesus smiled, because he knew the purpose of the mirror. To understand the creation is to honor the Creator, and to predict the storm is to protect the sheep. For this godlike simulation, Jensen became the chief engineer of reality. He doesn't talk about pixels anymore, he talks about physics, AI. He wants the digital wind to blow exactly like the real wind, spending his nights ensuring that the light in his virtual world obeys the same laws as the light of the first day. He walks through the wires of his empire, merging the biological worker with the mechanical assistant in a seamless dance. He knew one thing: intelligence is not just thinking, it is the power to simulate the consequences of love and labor. In the glowing infinite grids of the NVIDIA Omniverse, the gears of industrial AI started to click with a divine precision. It was vast. It was terrifyingly beautiful. Jensen was proving that a grain of wheat, if it is willing to imagine a whole new field before it is even plowed, can protect the harvest of 1,000 generations. The physical world is heavy and slow, but in Jensen's mirror, the future is already happening, one parallel second at a time. Today, in a world where every word, every image, and every cure is birthed in a cradle of silicon, the air is alive with the hum of the A100 and H100 altars. Jesus stands at the peak of the mountain of data, watching Jensen look down at the global civilization he has helped rewire. The world counts the trillions of dollars in market cap. The divine counts the trillions of calculations per second that give a blind man sight or a child an answer. Jensen didn't just build a company. He built the sun for the digital solar system. Back then, we thought intelligence was a scarce resource, a privilege of the few. We thought the limit of our progress was the limit of our own biological speed. But Jensen? He is the one who democratized the fire of the gods. He realized that by accelerating the machine, he was giving humanity more time, the only currency that truly matters to the Creator. By making the impossible computable, he was opening the gates of a new renaissance where the only limit is our imagination. He planted a seed that the world calls the AI King. But the divine calls it the humble forge. The grain of wheat that once washed dishes in a greasy kitchen has become the bread that feeds the minds of every researcher on the planet. But Jesus smiles because he knew the secret of the leather jacket. The man on the throne is the same man who was in the scullery. Focused, relentless, and eternally grateful for the chance to serve. For this eternal legacy, Jensen's name is etched into the light of every screen. Every time an autonomous car saves a life, every time a new drug is discovered in hours instead of decades, every time a dreamer uses a GPU to paint a world that never was, the mission is fulfilled. He proved that you don't need to be born with a golden spoon if you are willing to carry the iron of the soul. He knew one thing. We're not just calculating numbers, we are computing the future of the human spirit. In the glorious, golden sunset of the Silicon Age, the gears of the old era have faded into the background, and the new ones spin with a blinding, hopeful speed. The dishwasher has finished his work. The blacksmith has forged the key. And Jensen stands at the center of the light, a shepherd of the new era, leading us toward a horizon where every mind is a creator. The chip is a tiny piece of sand, but under Jensen's touch, it has become the cornerstone of a new heaven and a new earth.